Folks, how is it going today? All right. So, today, what I wanted to do is switch gears a bit and talk about growth ETFs, guys. I have handpicked my favorite growth ETFs, and we'll look through them today. And just I'll give you a map of my favorite picks, my top picks. They're nothing revolutionary, they're quite boring, but they get the job done when it comes to growth and ensuring that we are not losing money. Warren Buffett always said with investing, don't lose money, continue to grow it, guys. Yes, I invest in the income space a lot, but also I do have a portfolio that focuses on growth. Let's just jump into the names right now. All right, folks. First and foremost, guys, thank you to the 163 members we have now in the Patreon. Should you want access to all the calculators that I put in the Google Sheets, it's $5 a month, pretty much less than the cost of a coffee today. That's because of inflation, or $15 a month. Should you want to do a financial coaching session, I will leave a link in the description to sign up to the Patreon, guys. All right, guys. So let's talk about growth ETFs today, and I'm going to outline some of my favorite ETFs from a growth perspective. Some are more conservative than others. They have an international scope. So some are North America or US based equity funds, and some are international. And then some have more tailored strategies towards high growth. So the first on the list, guys, no surprise, VOO, Vanguard's S&P 500 ETF, guys. The expense ratio on this is super low, and effectively, it is an ETF that is purchasing the S&P 500 stocks. Right, it is one of a tried and true strongest performers over an extended period of time, decades and decades. Its price performance, it has done such a phenomenal price performance, and we will look at that. In Seeking Alpha, we'll compare all the different ones. But you guys know this one very well, I'm sure. But effectively, a S&P 500 fund, and you can't look any further than Vanguard's VOO. There might be one or two that have slightly lighter expense ratios, so you can look at those. But effectively, we're looking at a marginal difference. 0.03% is super efficient relative to the income ETF expense ratios that we look at. It's investing in the in the largest 500 companies in the US. I think it covers something like 86%, 87% of the market cap of the US. And just really quick, its performance since inception of this fund has been about 15%. And just really quick, looking at their holdings, it is going to be oriented around tech. That's going to be the majority of the percentages allocation to this fund. So Nvidia, Apple, Microsoft, Broadcom, Alphabet, Facebook, Tesla, Berkshire Hathaway, among others. Certainly, the Mag 7 is a strong component of a lot of these funds that we'll look at today, except for maybe VXUS. But nevertheless, investing in the Mag 7 has, paid great dividends, paid great performance over the past, 10, 20 years. So there's certainly a lot more than that. There's 500 names on this. You guys know this fund very, very well, and it's diversified, right? Yes, it's oriented mostly around tech, 36%, but you have communications, you have consumer discretionary, you have consumer staples, energy, healthcare, industrial, some real estate, utilities. So you get a bit of diversification, and again, you're getting a sizable chunk of the US total market cap. You can't look any further than this as a core staple to any great portfolio. Similarly, we have VTI, which is the total US stock market. And so this is comprising almost 3,500 stocks, right? S&P 500 has 500. This is adding in all of the US stocks that are available. And it is certainly a more diversified play relative to VOO. So you get a lot more diversification because your reach is that much further. The expense ratio is still the same at 0.03%, extremely efficient. You do get a 1% yield as well. This has done really well over the past since inception, really, since inception, 10% since 2001. So no slouch there. Of course, S&P 500 being a lot more allocated to the big names, Mag 7 names, more and more percentage weighting that way. You're going to see overall a better performance there. But nevertheless, VTI, if you want a little more diversification and you want to, if you want to really expand your reach beyond, um, certainly 500 names are great, but you want exposure to the whole market in the US. You can't look any further than VTI, guys. All right, next up, we we focus a lot on the US market or North American markets, and sometimes international funds are neglected. And so in my portfolio I like to include what's called VXUS, which is the Vanguard Total International Stock ETF, excluding US stocks. Okay, so this gives you an opportunity to expand beyond the US and diversify yourself further into those funds, right? Very low expense ratio at 0.05%. And some of the names you'll see on here are big brand names, right? Let's look at them. Whether it's Tencent, Taiwan Semi, Alibaba, ASML, Samsung, SAP, HSBC, Nestle, Novartis, AstraZeneca, etc. I mean, there's 8,000 names on this list. And so this gives you another healthy opportunity to diversify. You can do this even in the covered call space with NIHI, I think with NEOS. But when it comes to growth ETFs, VXUS has done okay. Of course, international markets have not done as well as US markets, but since inception, 5-6% total return on this. It's okay. Obviously, but recently it's done a lot better, and we'll look at the recent performance. But it's a great hedge here. I personally allocate something like 5-10% of the portfolio to this. I go more heavily indexed towards U.S. market because that's where the performance has been at. But you can't neglect other markets. Not financial advice, but in my opinion, you cannot neglect them, and you want to have a small allocation to them and effectively diversify. So that's next up on the list. Next up, we have Invesco's S&P 500 Momentum ETF. This is a newer ETF to the fold, and it's similar to the S&P 500 ETF, but this one rebalances based on market cap and based on what they call a momentum score. And the momentum score looks at price performance and maybe some other variables, but primarily price performance, which stocks, which companies are performing a lot better intra year, and if so, they will reallocate asset to those momentum based funds, as well as funds that are seeing greater market cap. This fund has done phenomenally since its inception. And even year to date, 27% year to date. Let's look at its performance since inception, 18% return since 2015. We'll look at its return in more detail. But it has a higher expense ratio, 0.13%, still fairly efficient relative to, again, the income based covered call ETFs that we look at a lot. Now, this is going to be an S&P 500 fund, right? So you're going to have a lot of those S&P 500 names, all of them, in fact. But the weighting, right? The percentage of allocation per fund will be different relative to the weighting of VOO. And because of that, you get the benefit of this strategy in their weighting, and then you'll get effectively a potentially higher price return on the way up, but maybe it drops heavier on the way down, just given they're investing in more of the high flyers. What comes up must come down. So it's more risky with this fund, but we'll look at its performance, and it's done really, really good since 2015. And then last on the list is going to be QQQM, which is the NASDAQ 100 and ETF from Invesco. This has a better expense ratio than QQQ, so I like it better. QQQM at 0.15% expense ratio. This is investing in tech, guys. So 100 of the best tech names in the US, primarily tech. Their performance since inception has been stellar. Since 2000. 20, this one since 2020, and but also QQQ has done has been around for much longer. But QQQ, 16% return since inception. And again, it does have a lot of those same names, but a much more focused version of just tech. Yes, VOO includes these names primarily. Yes, VTI does, and also Invesco's Momentum based one, S&P SPMO does as well. But this one is a much more focused version of it. Just 100 names, and there might be a little bit of diversification away from the S&P 500, just a bit, but primarily where you're gonna, make your money is those overlaps truly, like Nvidia, Apple, Microsoft, AVGO, Google, Tesla, Meta, etc. Guys. So a lot of these funds do have overlaps, and one might say, well, no, why? Are you looking to have all these funds that do overlap? I'm okay with that. I'm okay with having a good, more and more of a good thing. And with each of these, you get a little slice of something different. This one a little more oriented to tech. Invesco a little more oriented towards a momentum strategy. VOO, the tried and true, S&P 500 strategy. VTI, the broad-based look at the whole U.S. market, and then VXUS expansion into the international markets. All right, looking at the total return performance of these funds over the past year, let's look at them. VOO, 15%, QQQM or QQQ, 20%, SPMO, 24%, VTI, 13%. Look at this, VXUS, right? International recently has been on a tear, 24%. Let's pull this out and do let's do a 5-year look. All right, so VOO 100% over the past 5 years, QQQM 111%, SPMO 150% almost, VTI 90%, and VXUS almost 50%. And if you pull it back further, guys, now some of these again haven't been out as for the same amount of time, but QQQ, this is QQQ done 1,000% since its inception. SPMO 400%, but it's only been out, for a much shorter amount of time. VTI 484%, VOO 500%, VXUS really since inception, hasn't done phenomenally, like 52% since inception. It's not phenomenal, but I think, again, it's a great diversification play. So, this is kind of the lens. Whoops, this is kind of the lens on a max amount of time, but I suspect, S&P or SPMO to be, quite a great performer moving into, the next decade, really. So this is a really interesting one to consider. But guys, let me know what you think. Are you investing in some of these growth funds? I know we orient and talk about income a lot, but I again value a growth portfolio. I have a growth portfolio, guys. Sub to the channel. All the best and cheers.